Hey extra historians, welcome to Lies, the part of the show where we tell you what we got wrong and the stories we left out, which was a lot this time, and in general, things we weren't able to get to in the episode. I'm going to move on real quick because this was a huge series, one we had to go to 6 episodes on. We could have done like 50 episodes of this. Let's quickly get to recommended reading. A Concise History of the Haitian Revolution by Jeremy D. Popkin. Toussaint Louverture, A Revolutionary Life by Philip Giraud. Mike Duncan's The Revolutions Podcast Season 4. If you want like a really granular, if you were like, I liked this 6-episode series, but I wish one of these 9-minute episodes was actually 5 50-minute episodes, go listen to The Revolutions Podcast. Does a great job, but very extensive. There's a great BBC In Our Time episode on the Haitian Revolution, which is great. It's a roundtable of historians. You get a bunch of different perspectives. PBS has a great 1-hour documentary, Égalité for All, Toussaint Louverture and the Haitian Revolution. So if you want, it's probably going to be mostly what you've seen already in the series. In Our Time is a good way to get like a little bit of a different perspective. And the Revolutions Podcast, super granular. If you want to read a historical novel, The War of Knives by Bruce Campbell. It's actually the second in a trilogy, but it's sort of like an American Horatio Hornblower. Young American lieutenant gets embroiled in the Haitian Revolution. It's a really fun book. This was like I said, this was a hard series. There was so much, and you had to explain so much that was going on in French politics that we didn't really have time for. I had to simplify a lot. We had to leave out a lot of characters. Thankfully, I had an amazing artist, Nick, who translated this crazy like crayon scrawls of these scripts to very intelligible visuals that were respectful of what went on, but at the same time also managed to translate the horror of this. The problem with writing a series like this is because we are an animated show, when we're depicting things that are extreme violence, it can sometimes come off too much like a Looney Tunes, so I kind of tried not to go into very specific details about, for example, punishments, because if we actually depicted them like they happened in our style, the reality of it wouldn't come off. So it was a difficult series to deal with. Episode 1, a lot of people wanted us to talk about the fact that soldiers that were sent by Napoleon, a bunch of them ended up defecting and fighting on the Haitian side. That's true. A lot of them arrived thinking they were going to put down a rebellion, and instead were like, oh, this is quite like what's going on back home with occupying powers chopping up the country, and I think our sympathies are on the other side. So yeah, a bunch of them defected. There's a Polish community in Haiti to this day, specifically one village. And however, because it's the Haitian Revolution, none of this is a straight line, good, bad. There's a lot of gray area. There were also some Poles that were taken captive or who surrendered and were massacred. So again, like, there are no straight down the line nice stories about the Haitian Revolution. A lot of you said that we got the French tricolor backwards, which I'm so sorry about. What? What's that? We were right? We were right on a flag. It's a whole new world. So, sorry, I've been in quarantine for coronavirus like 3 weeks. I kind of have to make my own fun at this point. So until between 1790 and 1794, the tricolor was actually red, white, blue rather than blue, white, red. And then in 1794, it got flipped, which just shows you, that's like the French Revolution in microcosm, right? It's like people can't even agree on like what order the flag goes in because it came from revolutionary cockades and there's no order to a wheel that has red, white, blue in it. Wars between Haiti and the Dominican Republic. A lot of you want us to talk about this. I'm not going to a lot because I haven't read into it very deeply and I worry about flattening out important context by generalizing. But in 1821, Santo Domingo rose against the Spanish, and then Haitian army marched in, ended up putting it under occupation for 22 years with a lot of repression, partially because they needed some way to try and get money to pay the French indemnity that had been imposed upon them. So there were very heavy taxes, but also a lot of cultural, religious, and linguistic oppression. 22 years later, in 1844, there was a War of Independence on the Dominican side. In 1856, independence was gained. There were a lot of strained relations to this day, and in fact, there were some massacres in the 1930s when the dictator of the Dominican Republic killed about 20 to 30,000 Haitians along the border. So, yeah, things are tense to this day along that. Episode 2. One small issue that someone pointed out, Seal Kudum 1, I'm so sorry if I'm mispronouncing that username, pointed out that we really shouldn't have said that the goddess of love was who the oath was sworn to at the Bois Command ceremony, because there aren't really gods and goddesses in Haitian voodoo. There's a single god and lots of loa or spirits. This is true. This is one of those things where you simplify something and you end up getting it wrong. This was me trying to avoid use of the word loa, because then you have to explain the word loa, and we try and avoid unnecessary proper nouns to try and kind of keep everyone at the same place rather than throwing too many names at you. But yes, we absolutely should have said spirit rather than goddess. There isn't really a goddess of love or gods or goddesses in general in Haitian voodoo. For the record, the loa we were discussing is a Zili Dantour, who sometimes represents love and passion and sometimes represents rage and vengeance. So, pretty great deity to kick off the Haitian Revolution, right? There is that dichotomy from the very start, even in the symbolism. Looper Club wanted to ask about the refugees from Haiti triggering a yellow fever epidemic in Philadelphia in 1793. So this is kind of a thing, maybe. So that day when, in 1793, when 80% of the white population of Haiti fled Le Cap and ended up going to other Caribbean islands, the United States, a big group went to Philadelphia, which was the capital of the US at the time. And right around the time they arrive, a big yellow fever epidemic starts that between August and November of 1793, about 10% of Philadelphians died in this yellow fever epidemic. We don't know how many died from the epidemic or how many died naturally, but we know 5,000 people, 10% of the population, died in that period. And the US government fled. George Washington went to Virginia. So people blamed this on these new arrivals, which may have been fair. There could have been mosquitoes that were breeding in standing water in the ships that they used. At that time, they thought that yellow fever was communicated person to person, which it's not. It's mosquito-borne. But there is also this British merchant vessel that was in West Africa, and every port it stopped at along the way to Philadelphia had a yellow fever outbreak. So it's possible that that's actually where it came from, not from Haiti. But it was part of this general souring of relations between these refugees, which were at first received very amicably and sympathetically by the American public. And as the Haitian Revolution took on a more revolutionary character and sort of boosted its image abroad, things soured between Americans and the slave owners. Also, a bunch of American officials got hit up for bribes by French officials in something called the XYZ affair, which led to a deterioration of relations between the two countries, and the Quasi-War, which was the undeclared war that we talked about. We should do an episode on the Quasi-War and the XYZ affair at some point. Dutty Bookman's speech. I did not include this in our episode. This is the speech which traditionally Dutty Bookman was supposed to have said at the ritual that kicked off the revolution. It was kind of long, so I didn't really have the space for it. Also, there's questions about how historical it is and how much of it is folklore, but I'm going to read it here because I think it's an amazing speech, and I just like it. And I was sad that it didn't fit in the episodes. The good Lord who created the sun which gives us light from above, who rouses the sea and makes the thunder roar, listen well, all of you. This God, hidden in the clouds, watches us. He sees all that the white people do. The God of the white people demands from them crimes. Our God asks for good deeds. But this God who is so good demands vengeance. He will direct our hands. He will aid us. Throw away the image of the God of the whites who thirsts for our tears, and listen to the voice of liberty which speaks in the hearts of all of us. Amazing speech. Encapsulates a lot of the themes of the revolution, and also this idea that it is a religious revolution against the imposition of Christianity, or rather Christianity, I should say, as it was practiced by French colonials. Yeah, really cool. Sorry that I didn't get to it. Jules Goen said the Haitian Revolution had a huge impact on the USA's fear of abandoning its own slavery policy. Yes, this is pretty well documented. A lot of pro-slavery proponents in the United States were like, well, we can't emancipate the slaves because look at what happened in Haiti, particularly after the Dessalines massacres, right? Also, John Brown, as you mentioned in the episodes, that's what he wanted to happen when he did his raid on Harper's Ferry. He was like, well, it will be like Haiti, where there will be this general uprising that cannot be stopped. And sure, a lot of people may fall, including I personally, but eventually this will lead to the emancipation of enslaved people in America. Obviously did not happen. It had other effects too, though. After hearing that the revolution was planned at religious ceremonies, a lot of states in the South banned any religious ceremony by enslaved people unless a white man, usually a Protestant clergyman, was present. It may have played a part in inspiring the German Coast Slave Uprising in Louisiana in 1811, which was the largest slave uprising in American history. It involved about 200 to 500 enslaved people. And interestingly, that part of Louisiana was heavily settled by French colonial refugees from Haiti, by free people of color, and the enslaved people they brought along. So it's this question of like whether this was inspired or even just like the revolution was imported there, or the ideas of it were. This obviously did not work out. A militia rallied and killed about 95 of the rebels in trials or summary executions, or in a guerrilla war. 2 planters were killed. So it was, again, we'll get to that in a second. But N. Black mentioned that seems like a trend in revolutionary stories is that larger powers end up using it as a proxy war. Yep. We're going to see that quite a bit in our series on dividing the Middle East. When we get into the Arab Revolt and independence movements in Egypt, and even before World War I, there are German agents running around being like, hey, Egyptians, wouldn't you like to fight an insurrection against the British Empire and have it be a holy war? That would be a great thing to do. So yeah, this happens a lot in the early modern era. We saw this also with our Chinese Revolution series, right? Like everyone kind of has their fingers in the pie in some way, trying to turn it to their advantage, mostly because they don't like the Chinese imperial government. So yeah, we're going to see that in more episodes coming up pretty soon. A lot of you were curious about the number that we used, the 400 killed in the initial days of the uprising, 400 white French colonials. So we took that from the official report that was sent to the French government. So it's not like a number we just made up. And a lot of you are like, well, that seems like very few for such a large uprising. There's a couple reasons for that. One is that this is when the uprising is more local. It's in a rural district where there's not a huge population density of French colonials, right? There's a few per plantation, maybe like a dozen. A lot of those French colonials have horses, and the enslaved rebels are walking, so they can outdistance them pretty easily and flee. Also, there are militias out there fighting them, and the militias have muskets, and the rebels have agricultural implements and machetes and things like that. So anytime it comes to a stand-up fight or a defense, they generally lose, but they come back with more people. So that's the numbers for the first couple of weeks. But by the time you get 2 months in, there are 4,000 French colonials who have been killed, including soldiers. So the violence escalates as the revolution gets bigger, as it gets population centers. But these initial reports that come into France of like thousands of white colonials killed, seem to be spurious. It's good to remember that when you read something from a newspaper at this time, it's often like, I talked to a guy who talked to a guy who talked to a guy. Also, interestingly, a lot of the things that you hear about these Haitian revolutionaries supposedly doing at the beginning, like carrying the head of a French child on a stick as a battle standard, are also things people accused Irish rebels of doing just a few years before. So there may be embellishment, there may be games of telephone going on. It may be just a kind of general thing. People would say, well, you know, these uncivilized people, this is what they do when they rise up against their colonial masters. They cut the heads off children and put them on a stick. So, you know, again, a lot of this is still very confused. I went with what historians seem to think. It used to be, it was thought that there were a lot of colonial deaths at the beginning, now not so much. Episode 4, we flipped around Louis's button, we reversed it. It says Louis XVI, which is not a Roman number, instead of X. It's supposed to be XVI, we said VXI. Gee, it's almost like the guy who writes and checks these has a pattern recognition issue. Our map of the French Empire was one from before the 7 Years' War, showing Canada, which was already lost to the British. Sorry about that. Also much more of India than they possessed at that time. We use a world history maps application that I guess was off on that one. What was France replacing the Catholic Church with? I don't want to say too much here, but basically they wanted to limit the political and economic power of the church and decided to essentially like do this de-Christianization campaign and set up the revolution itself as a religion. It was initially called the Cult of Reason. It ended up being called the Cult of the Supreme Being. And they literally went into French cathedrals and like stripped out all the religious imagery and instead put like busts of Marat and like and other revolutionary martyrs in them and the goddess of reason. And they had this like festival on June 6th that was supposed to be the cult of the festival of the Supreme Being. It's real weird. And I would love to do a series on that at some point because the religious policies of the French Revolution could get real wacky. And I love writing about unusual, unfamiliar, particularly kind of burned hot and fast kind of religious beliefs. I think they're very interesting. Didn't last. Catholic Church came back with Napoleon. Episode 5. A lot of you quibbled about the difference between slavery and forced labor. And yeah, a lot of Haitians also did not see a lot of difference. There was a difference legally, and the treatment of people was much better under forced labor. I mean, again, like you're quibbling over degrees of bad. The reason that the arguments I made were not arguments that like I personally put in, it's stuff that historians have said that I repeat. I try not to just like make things up whole cloth. I try and tell you what historians say in a more fun, concise way. So particularly something that controversial is not something that I'm going to just like be like, oh, well, here's what I think about it. It's like, no, here's what historians say about it, but I'm repackaging it a little bit. So historians find this to be a really important difference. So I try to communicate that. But yeah, people have rights. Their children are not born into slavery. They can marry, which they could not do before. Your family is not going to get split up and shipped around. And you can't be physically punished, which is, you know, that's a lot of difference. But it's still forced labor, right? It's not a good thing. A lot of you British, what are the British doing wearing top hats into combat? This is like tricorns and, you know, Peninsular War era. Colonial uniforms of the British Empire are real weird. Yeah, we got these from a book called British Forces in the West Indies, 1793 to 1815. And yeah, there were a bunch of units that actually wore these into combat in Haiti. Weird, I know. They look strange to me too, but I wanted to put them in partially because, you know, we do have to change how we imagine the past to a certain extent because we get into ruts. Same thing with like the marble sculptures in ancient Rome, right? Or Angkor Wat always being a ruin. I like to sprinkle in a little things here of like, hey, the past may have looked a little different than you thought. There may be a little more variety than you think. Episode 6. I just wanted to say that we do talk about how Haiti was kind of like given over, broken. Like even before the Haitian Revolution, it was designed so it couldn't stand on its own. However, it's important not to think of the history of Haiti being like, well, it started broken and it's just sort of like continued to be broken for all of time. There have been economic recoveries in Haiti, mostly in the tourism sector. One of the more famous ones, and this is sort of weird how it comes up, which is that in the 1970s there was a big tourism resurgence, and this comes up sometimes if you're reading about the Clintons, because they had their honeymoon in Haiti, and you can see these very nice pictures of them on a beach in Haiti as young people. I know, weird to think of today, but often what happens with these economic recoveries is there's an earthquake or there's some kind of political instability that messes things up a bit. Sometimes it involves outside hands. So right now, Haiti looks like it may be on a bit of a tourism upswing, and a lot of it, interestingly, is centered around sites from the revolution and afterward. The forts, the plantations. There's a lot of cool historical architecture in particular in Haiti, and I really hope that things start to get economically better there. It would be great to see things even out a little more. Coming up on Extra History, next week we're going to start traveling the 14th century world with one of my favorite historical characters, Ibn Battuta. If you don't know who he is a 14th century Moroccan scholar and judge who basically traveled the whole of the Muslim world in about 21 years, and his stories are bonkers and involve lots of pirates and Mongols and people getting executed by being flung off cliffs with catapults and just all sorts of cool stuff. The first episode is more an introduction to him. It does get really wild to the second episode, but I think you're really going to enjoy it. After that, we're looking at the great powers wrangling over maps during and after World War I, causing all sorts of problems we're still living with today with dividing the Middle East. Yeah, so this is the series where we're going to be talking about all the guys in drawing rooms in Paris being like, that's Iraq, and that's Syria, and that's Lebanon, and Palestine. What are we going to do with that? Probably something that's going to cause a lot of difficulty in the future. After that, patrons choose. Our topic right now is adventure and achievement. We're still collecting topic suggestions. We just redid how we do our Patreon. If you're a patron right now, basically nothing changed about your benefits except them maybe going up a little bit and you getting more. One of the things you can do now, by the way, is you can ask questions that specifically get answered on lies. So if you ever wanted something really specifically answered on lies, then yeah, think about donating to the Patreon. Never been a better time to do it. Also, we folded the Extra Mythology Patreon into our Extra History Patreon, so it's now just an Extra Credits Patreon, so you get early episodes of both. Walpole fact. This is weirdly disconnected, actually, but the British object in invading Hispaniola was to prevent the revolution spreading to nearby Barbados, which at this time was second only to Saint-Domingue for its sugar production. Britain was a major player in the Caribbean slave trade in supporting these colonies. In fact, the Treaty of Utrecht, signed between 1713 to 1715, they had to send it around to get it signed by everyone, it took 2 years. The Spanish Empire had given what's called an asiento, a sort of monopoly on a specific trade route, to the British Empire, giving them the exclusive right to run one slave ship from Africa to the Spanish Caribbean. If that sounds familiar, this was the sole asset owned by the South Sea Company, which was supposed to make huge amounts of money, and didn't, because it got super overvalued. And Walpole, of course, would come to power amidst the South Sea bubble crisis, but would also meet his fall due to that asiento. He ended up being a huge opponent of war with the Spanish Empire because he argued that this needed to be protected, this exclusive right. But the pro-war faction prevailed and ended up embroiling his administration in the War of Jenkins' Ear, which ended up becoming the War of Austrian Succession, be connected to things like the 7 Years' War, and it was one of the first global conflicts. But military losses during that war ended up actually making him fall from power. So the Caribbean slave trade, which was still part of Saint-Domingue, and actually there was a lot of illegal trading between Saint-Domingue and Barbados, which was another reason the British were interested in it. They were beneficiaries of this black market trade between the two islands. Yeah, track straight back to Walpole. He didn't have a lot of involvement in Caribbean policy. Strangely enough, I was surprised to find that. All right, thanks very much. We got it in just under the wire. I'll see you next time for Ibn Battuta, and we're actually going to do a short little episode that may come out before this one on coronavirus and the 1918 flu. See you next time.
Special thanks to our educational tier patrons Ahmed Ziad Turk, Joseph Blame, and Dominic Valenciana.